Secretary of State Michael Adams, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So you and Governor Beshear have been working together to come up with a new system for the primary elections here in Kentucky. We've already moved the election from May to June, and in June we're still going to have very few people out and about, and it's going to look very different. So when people are voting, what does this new system look like?
Well, the biggest misconception out there is that we took people's rights away. We didn't do that. We actually expanded the ease of voting. We did three big things. Number one, we expanded absentee voting. We made it much easier. The right to vote in person is in our Constitution. I would never take that away. But the right to vote absentee is in our Constitution too. People can vote absentee in case of illness or medical emergency. That's always been Kentucky law. And so we've actually made that easier. We're launching an online portal where people can apply to get their absentee ballot, and they can mail it back or they can drop it off at their clerk's office. Again, absentee balloting is already offered. It's just we made it much easier. You can still email, fax, or call your county clerk, but we also created an online portal. So number one, we made absentee balloting easier. Number two, we've got to consolidate the polling locations. We just don't have enough locations that are capable of social distancing. We don't have enough poll workers. It normally takes some 3,600 voting locations and nearly 16,000 poll workers to run a traditional election. We don't have the locations. A lot of our locations are nursing homes or places that are closed like schools. And we don't have people running up to volunteer to be poll workers. We had enough of a crisis getting poll workers before this pandemic. So second thing is we're consolidating polling locations. Every county will have at least one. Some will have, of course, many more than that, but many fewer overall. And then number three, election day is going to look a lot different. Our county boards of elections are coming back with plans for us to approve. But the bottom line is we're going to limit direct contact between voters and poll workers and between voters and other voters. We don't want people touching the same touch screen all day, every day. We want to try to limit direct contact.
And I want to talk more about in-person voting in just a minute, but let's talk about the mail-in process. So soon, voters will get a postcard in the mail that tells them about these changes and some other information. So what happens from there? Obviously, they'll probably go onto the online portal, and how do they proceed in order to be able to vote?
So every registered voter in Kentucky is going to get a postcard in the mail. It's going to have information about voting absentee. It's going to have a link to a website where you can go prove your identity and request an absentee ballot to be mailed to you to either mail back or drop off in person. It's also, the postcard also will have the phone number for the county clerk. So you can call your county clerk and get the absentee ballot, or you can call your county clerk and make arrangements to vote in person. We're not going to require people to get an appointment to vote in person, but we do strongly encourage that so that we can space out the number of people who are voting at any one location at any time.
This is a different system than most people are used to with the mail-in ballots and all the different steps. So how do you anticipate this could have an impact on voter turnout in the elections in June?
Well, it's too soon for me to know what the turnout is going to be and project that. We'll have a better sense of that once we open the online portal, once the county clerks start getting calls and emails and faxes for people to vote in person or to get an absentee ballot. Hopefully, we'll be able to offer a projection closer to the election. Other states have actually seen their turnout stay even or go up. You've not really seen a drop off in the turnout. Certainly in the states that have accommodated the way that we have accommodated voters here, you've seen turnout for the most part increase. If I had to guess today, I think that turnout on the Democratic side will actually be maybe higher than typical. What we've seen in some other states is Democratic turnout has increased. I think that's because they've got a presidential race, although it's pretty much decided, but also because Democrats typically are more comfortable voting by mail. You've seen Democratic primaries in other states have their turnout actually increase significantly over past cycles. The big challenge for me is to destigmatize absentee balloting among Republicans. For the simple reason, if Republicans are angry and all crowd the polls and defy our requests for them to show courtesy to their neighbors, then we're going to have people get sick. And we're going to have polling locations with 6-hour lines like they had in Milwaukee. And so you're going to see me the next several weeks explain to people how this isn't a vote by mail system the way you have on the West Coast, where ballots just get mailed out to random mailboxes, people in government databases. This is a secure system. We're tracking every absentee ballot with a barcode. Our lock boxes are secure where voters can drop off their ballots to their clerk's offices. You got to prove your identity to even get the ballot. So we've got ballot integrity built into this process, and I'm also very proud that one of the benefits of this is the process we're using actually helps us clean up our voter rolls by helping us track inactive voters better. And number two, it also helps us move very quickly into a paper ballot system. A number of our counties in the state actually don't have the capacity for paper trails. They use all electronic machines. I don't want people touching screens right now, one after the other. I want us to move to a paper ballot system anyway for lots of reasons, but especially now. So one of the benefits of this agreement with the governor I've reached is it allows us to draw down state and federal funds and buy new machines, buy new envelopes, new scanners and so forth for the counties and upgrade them very quickly to paper balloting. That's good whether you're concerned about electronic hacking or you're concerned about vote fraud or the ability to have a recount or a recanvass accurately. Everybody wins.
Let's talk a little bit about in-person voting. You said that people can come early, there's early voting, but election day itself is obviously going to look very different than what you and I and the rest of Kentuckians are used to. So when someone goes to vote in person, what does it look like if their new polling location is different? Because like you said, we're not going to be able to have all of our polling locations. Is there going to be personal protective equipment? Everybody probably needs to wear a mask. So what does it look like?
Well, I don't have a one-size-fits-all solution for everyone. What I worked out with the governor is to permit the counties to come back to the State Board of Elections with plans for approval that are specific to their counties. Will work well in Jefferson County, wouldn't work well in Owsley County, and vice versa. So different counties are going to do it differently. It's going to depend on the mechanics of their locations. It's going to depend on the mechanics of the type of equipment that they have available. So I don't have a pat answer to give you at this point. I do expect that by the time the State Board of Elections convenes next Tuesday, May 19th, we'll have a lot of these plans from the counties to review, and I'll be able to give you a better sense of what most counties are going to end up doing. But certainly at this point, what we're asking people to do is come back with plans that provide for a limitation of direct contact between poll workers and voters and between voters and other voters.
And obviously, Kentucky is not the only one facing these issues. So what's being done in some of our other states to address these things? Have their primary elections been moved? Are they moving to this type of system? What are we seeing in other states?
Well, obviously, the states that voted before coronavirus broke had the benefit of not having to be concerned with this, but pretty much every state that's voted since mid-March is doing what we're doing or being even more liberal with vote by mail. Some states have eliminated voting in person. They only let you vote in person if you belong to a certain class of individual, like the disabled or the homeless. I wasn't comfortable with that. I don't think it's constitutional or good policy. But you're not seeing a single state have a traditional election with all of their polling sites and all of their poll workers. And that, I would add, is true of red states. It's true of states with Republican secretaries of state. I'm doing what they're doing, except my version is more conservative because of all the ballot integrity checks that we have built into our system. But you're not seeing a single state out there being reckless and subjecting themselves to the old way of doing things. It's just not feasible during a pandemic. And if they had done that, they would have been sued and they would have lost. And you would have had a judge write their election rules. I wasn't comfortable with that. I wanted to write our election rules.
So, but obviously there have been some critics of this plan. So what are some of the main criticisms and what do you have to say to those critics?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, people say, well, I can go to Kroger, I can go to the polls, but you're not the only person who's involved in that transaction. We also have to have locations and we also have to have poll workers. And so you can't go to Kroger if Kroger's not open, and you can't go to Kroger if none of the people who work at Kroger show up. So it doesn't quite translate as easily. Also, not every county in Kentucky's got a Lowe's or a Home Depot or a Kroger or a Meijer. These small towns and these small counties, they're not like Jefferson or Fayette. They're different. So you can't have an election in person in Jefferson and a vote by mail in Owsley. You have to have a uniform system because of equal protection under the Constitution. Another issue people are concerned about is election fraud. There's no one who's tougher on election fraud than I am. I spent 2 years of my life, my life savings running for this job on a platform of ballot integrity. I believe in that. That's why I put so many ballot integrity safeguards into this system. In very short order, you're going to see me roll out a task force to pay attention to any concerns and track any concerns about fraud. Absentee ballot fraud is a real thing. I talked about during the campaign. I'm not going to dismiss that, but the fact is it tends to happen in local races. It tends to happen in elections that are easier to steal because there are fewer votes cast. So there are only a few municipalities around our state that are having elections in May for local offices. That's where we're going to focus our effort. But the days when you could steal a statewide election or a national election are over. Back in the 30s or 40s, you could get away with that potentially, but you can't anymore. Not with all the controls we have built in. So our focus is going to be on the local elections where it's easy, in theory, to steal an election. But as a whole, it's a very safe system. I'm very proud of it.
And so obviously you said it's too early to tell with the primary election about turnout and things like that, but how do you see this potentially impacting the general election? Obviously we can't tell the future. We don't know what anything is going to look like in terms of the coronavirus come November, but we could still be in the same position. So what does the general election potentially look like under this scenario?
Well, something both the governor and I have said publicly is A, we're only changing the rules for the primary. We're not touching November yet. And number two, we're going to learn from this experience about what works and what doesn't work. I'm going to pick on Wisconsin for just a minute. They're kind of the whipping boy nationally because of how things went down there. But here's the first lesson we learned from Wisconsin. The worst possible thing you can do is leave voters in suspense about what the rules are going to be. The worst part about Wisconsin is you had brinksmanship between branches of government, between Republicans and Democrats. It went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court the day before the election, and people didn't know what the rules were. Could they vote by mail or not? Could they vote in person or not? And that's what led to such a horrible outcome in Wisconsin. You had people who missed their opportunity to vote by mail and then couldn't vote in person because the lines were so long. So number one, we've learned from that experience, and we're not going to have that. That's why the governor and I wanted to approach this proactively weeks and weeks ahead and work out new rules. So the first lesson learned we've already implemented, which is work out the rules in advance and do so in a bipartisan way and don't game the system and don't leave people in suspense. Now, as far as what works on June 23rd, we'll find out. We'll find out if there are issues with ballots going out and being tracked. I don't think there will be. We've got a pretty good system built in. We'll find out if there are particular locations that have problems getting poll workers or having crowds. We're going to learn from this experience. And then certainly my hope in November is to have a traditional election. But I think we'll learn a lot from this experience, even for elections that are not held in a pandemic. One of the things I advocated for in the legislature, unfortunately the session was aborted, we never got to pass it, was legislation to make it easier to vote in various ways, to help recruit poll workers, help combine precincts and so forth, to make the system easier for people, make it easier for people to vote on the other side of the county instead of having to go to their precinct so they could vote when they got off work. And those are some of the things that we'll actually implement in this plan, and we'll see if they work as pilot projects.
So finally, is there anything else you want people to know about this new system? And if people have questions or concerns, how can they express those ahead of the June election?
Well, sure. If there's one thing I want to leave people with, it's this. If your voter information is not up to date, if your name is changed, if your address is changed, it's very important that you tell us, because if you don't, we're going to mail a postcard to the wrong person and you're not going to get it and you're not going to get this information and someone else will. So go to govoteky.com, our website, govoteky.com. There's a box you can check called Update Your Information. We want to have everyone's information as accurate and up to date as possible so we can send this card and ultimately the ballot out to the right person. So that's very important. I'm sorry, what was your second question?
If people have other questions about the system ahead of voting, how do they get those answered as well?
You can call my office in Frankfort, 502-564-3490. You can call us. You can email us at sos.secretary@ky.gov. You can also call the Board of Elections. We'll take any questions that we can answer, and we want to make sure everyone gets the information they need.
Awesome. Well, Secretary of State Michael Adams, thank you so much, and we look
Thank
forward
you. Anytime.
to how the elections go.
Thanks. Me too.